if you have mental health issues or you have trauma and wounding, all of that affects your mental state, and it affects the way you think, and it affects how you perceive the world, and it affects the actions you take. So that's why we are all about really putting energy into the shadow work aspect of it, because until you do that, you'll never get to where you want to be, because those blocks will always be there.
All right, welcome everybody to Spirituality. If you are new here, my name is Kat, and I'm a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. I'm so pleased to be joined today by Tiarra, who is the co-host of the Goddess Vibration podcast and has her own spiritual community that she's built up around that, the Vibe Tribe. I'm so pleased and excited to have you here today, Tiarra.
Yes, thank you so much, Kat, for having me here today. I was really excited to be on your podcast because, you seem to cover a lot of diverse topics, but I just have a lot to talk about. And that's one of the reasons why I have a podcast. Me and my co host started this podcast is because we've both had our own separate spiritual journeys, but in those journeys, we've just discovered so much, not just about ourselves, but about spirituality and about communicating with other energetic realms. She and I are both channelers, so we've had these experiences with different enlightened spiritual beings, and so it's just been a whirlwind. So it's always nice to get that opportunity to kind of share a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. And I'm a big believer too. And the more we can get messages out there, the more we can share with other people, the better off
Absolutely.
everybody is going to be. The right messages are out there for everybody to click on. We just have to have the courage and the compassion for ourselves to speak
Mm,
out and have some belief in ourselves for sure. Can you tell me
absolutely.
a little bit about your spiritual journey? Like, how did you sort of come to where you are?
Yes, and it's interesting. I feel like for the most part, even if we're not consciously aware of it, that we're all on these spiritual journeys or a spiritual journey of some sort. So for myself, I want to say that that sort of slow trickle into broader awareness started probably when I was in my mid 20s. And so that would have been, oh my gosh, I'm aging myself. That would have been probably around 2004, 2005. Um,
Same.
yeah,
So you're in good company.
great. And I actually had a very profound spiritual awakening in 2019 that was triggered by a twin soul connection. Now, the twin soul concept, I know that a lot of people have different perspectives, and I feel like there's a lot of confusion out there surrounding it. My twin soul connection is quite unique, as he and I are what are referred to as split souls. So, at some points in our spiritual journey, our souls split into two aspects.
Hmm.
And we initially met in 2011, and we actually met on Xbox of all places, and kind of like had that initial spark and that initial intense attraction, and were drawn to each other, and then we parted ways and reconnected in 2019. Now, the interesting thing about divine connections is that they're energetically very powerful. So, we just had a very brief interaction online, and that ended up triggering some type of energetic shifts that literally happens overnight. And so when that happens, I sort of had this immediate shift in awareness where I was like, oh my God, we live in a matrix. A reality is not what we really think it is. What do I
Yeah.
need to do? How do I make sense of my new reality and this new perspective? How do I, you know, expand and evolve and become better so that I feel like I'm aligning in the way that I need? And so that process has been going on for myself for 5 years, and it's never done. Like the awakening and the healing and the ascending and the expanding really never ends. So for myself, it's been going on for a couple years, and I've recently gotten to a place where I have had to really lean very, very heavily on the archangels and the gods and the other really enlightened spiritual beings to get me to that next step, which really was a very mental process. And it's interesting because I feel like there's not a lot spoken of when it comes to awakenings around how much of it is a mental process and how it's not just about love and lights. It's also about the shadow work and looking at your demons and looking at yourself and looking at how your behavior is affecting not only you but other people that you care about, and like really trying to have that broader higher awareness that so many people lack today. So that is not easy. And it's been, a very, I don't want to say like terrible journey. It hasn't been terrible. It's just been very, very impactful. It's required a lot of energy and effort. But I feel like I'm getting to that place now where I'm like, okay, how do I shift out of some of these negative patterns so that I can manifest the life that I want for myself? So ultimately, that's kind of my journey in a nutshell. And I feel like a lot of people can probably relate to that in different ways. But I did want to share a little bit more about being more realistic when it comes to spiritual journeys, because I don't feel enough is spoken of when it comes to like the shadow work aspects and doing the deeper, harder work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The portrayal that we get online a lot of time is very guru on the mountaintop, some person sitting out in the woods,
Oh my God.
speaking love
It
and
really
light
is.
and all of that. And not that there's anything wrong with that path, but most of us are living in the midst of modern society, and I think a lot of people get to a point where they start to do that inner work, and
Yes,
it's a kind of a slog, and it starts to get a little bit muddy, like moving through molasses. It
it
feels like one
does.
step forward to make 10 steps back, and getting
Absolutely.
deeper into like, where did this belief come from?
Yeah.
Like, and I didn't even know I was carrying it around. So it's super relatable. I think all of us go through all of that and continually go through it. To speak to your point, I'm not sure that discovery process ever really comes to an end. You keep working through and working to remove, to your point, limiting beliefs
Yes.
on who you can be. So
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. You mentioned that you've been getting into a practice called womb light,
Mm.
and I confess that I'm not sure what that is. Can you tell us what is womb light?
Yes. So I discovered I had an interest in energy work. And,
Mm-hmm.
we have the ability to channel different energies and different frequencies, and they come in many different forms. So, I'm going to speak a little bit to womb light, but
Mm-hmm.
before womb light became a thing, a lot of people were familiar with Reiki.
Mm-hmm.
And even beyond Reiki, there are other frequencies like the Litarian rays that are connected to the archangels and to the ascended masters. So Boomlight is very interesting. It's a frequency that is similar to Reiki, but it's the divine feminine aspect of the life force energy. It's also a very grounding energy. So when it's channeled, it's an energy that actually comes from the earth. It comes from Gaia, the spirit of the planet, and
Mm-hmm.
it's meant to assist women who are on a journey of motherhood or fertility. And I was really drawn to this because I've struggled with fertility matters. I had endometriosis. I also have ovarian insufficiency. So, you know, there was a lot of struggle there when it came to my fertility. And so I was looking for some type of energetic work that would support that,
Mm-hmm.
but something that was, you know, feminine and nurturing. And that's what womb light is. It's a very nurturing energy, very feminine, very grounding. In addition to that, I do also channel Reiki. I'm a level
Mm-hmm.
2 Reiki practitioner, and I've actually spent a lot of time sitting with the Reiki frequencies and just reflecting on them and listening to what the energies have to say. And, you know, originally that's what Reiki was. Reiki was an energy that was meant to trigger spiritual growth and spiritual enlightenment over time. So I've been trying to kind of get back to that original Reiki focus, which was about the self, and build upon that so that I can continue to expand that outward and help others. Um, I am also interested in some of the Litarian rays. I've been exploring one specific Litarian ray frequency that's tied to Archangel Raphael. I haven't put that into practice on others quite yet because I'm working on reattuning to some of the Reiki energies.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just think energy work is so fascinating, and I've become quite energy sensitive. So when I sit with these frequencies, I feel it, and it always has a powerful impact. So I know that this is energy that can really impact and help others if used in the right manner.
When you have people who come to you for Reiki, what is it that they're seeking? Like, what does Reiki primarily help people with in their spiritual journey? Or are there misconceptions about what it's actually for?
With a lot of practices, there's always misconceptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with Reiki, I do think that there's a lot of misconceptions around how it was originally meant to be used. At this point, there are so many offshoots of Reiki, and they're all so different, and they all have different lineages and different methods and strategies. So there could potentially be Reiki teachings out there that, like, have specific intentions. The energies that I work with don't have an intention. And so it's more just we channel the energy to be utilized for the best and highest good of whoever comes for that work. And the energy will do what it needs to do. The focus behind Reiki is to bring back balance into the self, into the body, into the mind. Because once you balance, for example, the mind, that's when you balance the rest of the body. So that's originally what those energies were meant to be used, and that's my philosophy behind it. But I know that there are others that perhaps use energies and do set specific intentions. That's just how I use it, and it's a very intuitive process. So oftentimes if I sense something energetically, I will make note of it and then share that, because I feel like that's how you really help someone when it comes to using these frequencies, is to let them know if something's coming up, if there's more that they should be aware of, and then, if it's something specific, how they can go about working through that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I appreciate that perspective on it. So it's like an energy activation, and then let the individual soul, the individual spirit, use that energy to come through in the way that it needs to for
Yes.
that particular person.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that perspective on it. I think that there's no doubt at all that, especially in the last, I don't know, decade or so, spiritual practices have just proliferated.
Oh,
Like
it's just
there's
blown up, yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely everywhere and different. And I think it's beautiful to see so many different people following different paths and exploring and kind of creating their own ways to work with energy. I don't think that there's any limitation on that.
Mm.
But it can be useful, I think, for people to be able to keep an eye out for what things feel authentic
Mm.
and holistic to them,
Yeah.
rather than potentially what word do I want to use? I don't want to use predatory necessarily, but sometimes when things get turned into a business, they're quick to diagnose you with something that their business can offer you assistance with.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's important for people to be able to search out that authenticity for themselves, like what feels authentic and good to me in a practice, when they're
Yes.
looking for stuff like that.
Yes, and that's a very intuitive process. It's just a matter of, does this energetically align with what I'm seeking? Does this feel right to me? Is this person an energetic match for my needs? And I feel like as long as people are doing it that way, you can't go wrong. I do know that there are a lot of predatory practices out there. I feel like even in my journey, I ran into a lot of practitioners who perhaps weren't well versed, and me not knowing any better, being relatively new to the journey, I just was like, hey, this person's got this really great cheap offer. That's all I care about. So, it really should be a very intuitive process when it comes to finding a practitioner who can support what you're looking for.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's anything to feel like sad or ashamed of. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've ran into like groups that I joined or things
Oh
that I
yeah.
did that just didn't end up being aligned with what I was feeling coming through, right?
Yes.
And I think that's really normal. So if you come
Yeah.
across something that doesn't align, you don't feel bad about walking away from something that just doesn't align with you, for
Yes,
sure.
yes. And it's interesting that you say that, because I stumbled upon relatively early in my journey a huge twin flame Facebook group, and there's tons of those these days.
Mm-hmm.
And with a lot of the misconceptions around twin flames, some of the rhetoric around it was quite destructive. But when you're reading it and you're mad at your twin flame, you're like, yeah, I should block them and not talk to them anymore ever again and go find someone else. So it's easy to get caught up in that rhetoric and some of those destructive beliefs when we're carrying specific feelings or sentiments that aren't the healthiest. So, part of the spiritual journey, those things do happen.
Oh, absolutely. And the way that we now have global communication,
Yeah.
Like literally anyone can be online starting a group and start it's more important than ever before that we're especially attuned into what feels good and what doesn't, what aligns with us and what doesn't,
Yeah.
because there is a site, a post, a group out there for every frequency from high to low. So depending on what you're clicking on,
Mm-hmm.
those algorithms will lead you in the direction of your own thoughts. It's really interesting. Speaking of all of this stuff with getting messages and kind of the trend of humanity, I couldn't help but notice on your website when I was looking at it that you and your co-host have podcast on there where we're talking about some of the channeling coming through and some of the messages that you get, and I couldn't help but notice that it was described on there as a divine clusterfuck, and I became totally intrigued with that. I think
Yeah.
I really am, because there's you kind of getting mixed signals out there in the spiritual community. Some people are all love and light and everything is okay. Some people are getting different kinds of messages coming through
Yeah.
about the collective energy in the world, and so I'm curious. What are you getting on that?
We're getting a mixture of things. And, we are a very authentic podcast. We have no problem speaking our truths and being honest and expressive.
Mm-hmm.
So you saw the term clusterfuck on there. We don't sugarcoat. So a lot of the things that we're seeing and getting is a mixture of both. And I think a big part of it is that energetically, a lot of people aren't in the best state right now. There's a lot going on the planet. There's a lot of energies impacting the planet right now. But there's also a lot of people who are kind of like in this in between phase, like they're stagnant and they're stuck and they're unhappy, but they're not quite ready to take that next leap and that next step. And there's too
Mm-hmm.
much fear. So I feel like there's that component where there's a lot of people who are scared and uncertain, and then there's another component of energies or sentiments that are people who are okay. Well, I love the love and lights, and I'm all about it, and I'm embracing this, and I'm aware, and I'm awake, and I'm excited and looking forward to the future. I just don't know how to get there. So it's kind of like two opposing energies, and we see it and we feel it, and so that's why we wanted to launch a spiritual community, is to sort of bring in those people who are at that phase where they're awake and they're aware and they want to heal and they want something better. They just don't quite know how to get over to that next step and how to get over that block or blocks that might be there. So
Yeah.
we've been putting a lot of energy, even in the podcast and in some of our episodes, into, gosh, how can we really help people get to that next phase, get to that next step? And for the most part, as I'm learning and as I'm going through the process myself, it really is just a mental thing, you know? It's very, very mental. And if you have mental health issues or you have trauma and wounding, all of that affects your mental state, and it affects the way you think, and it affects how you perceive the world, and it affects the actions you take. So that's why we are all about really putting energy into the shadow work aspect of it, because until you do that, you'll never get to where you want to be, because those blocks will always be there. That's mostly what we're sensing, and my co-host is very, very energetically sensitive when it comes to what's going on the planet and how people are feeling and the energies, and so we've explored that a
Mm-hmm.
lot in a lot of our meetings and discussions. And so again, we put together this community to really kind of help people get to where they want to be, get over those blocks and that stagnant energy, so that they can manifest the life that they want.
Absolutely. And I think I appreciate that. I appreciate you, because I think it's such an important message to spread and get out there, is
Yes.
there is a path out of those uncomfortable and destructive thought processes.
Yes.
There is a path out of fear and lack mentality.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge socialization that's around us all the time. If you
All the
watch the
time.
news or TV, or even TV dramas are set up to have a third act meltdown or a third act drama. Something bad has to happen before something good can happen. There's
Mm-hmm.
a massive socialization around those kinds of things. And so finding pathways out of those thought processes can be challenging
It
for
is.
people in the modern world. Absolutely.
It is, and it's again. Keep talking about how when it comes to spirituality and New Age, that there's just not enough focus on that shadow work and those darker aspects. And you're right that our society programs people and it's socialized into us to be in a state of fear, like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that breeds anxiety and that breeds uncertainty, and people get complacent and they want to stay in their bubble because that's where they feel safe. So, when you're on the spiritual journey, it takes a lot of courage to get out of that bubble and to take that leap and that step out of it, because you don't know what's coming. You don't know what might happen. You're taking a leap of faith and stepping out of everything that you know and believe. And that's scary. It's quite scary. So we understand that. I understand that. And part of the community, part of the effort behind it is to let them know, hey, we get it. We've been there. We know what it feels like. We know it's scary out there. We're here to hold your hand and walk you through it.
Yeah. The more I think people walk that path, they start to realize that they want to feel better. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
way to feel better about your life
Yeah.
and about humanity and about the prospects of the world.
Mm-hmm.
There's a path out of this sort of narrow-minded view that we see portrayed a lot
Oh, yeah.
on TV. I think for a long time, most of the history of humanity, fear has been a tactic used to control how people behave or how people
Absolutely.
think.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way to shake that control is to start walking through the fear and out the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But it is a kind of a treacherous path, or it definitely at least feels like a precarious path through that.
Those are great words. Treacherous, precarious are excellent words to describe it. I came from a religious background, and even in religion, there's fear in there. Like some of the texts that talk about fearing God and or fearing that you're going to burn in hell if you don't obey God. Like even in some of the Ten Commandments, which are seem to be well intentioned, there's still this component of fear behind some of them, that if you violate any of those, you will burn for eternity. So, coming from that and trying to shift into spirituality, I had to really take or put a lot of energy and effort into leaving some of that fear behind, because spirituality is completely different. Spirituality to me is a journey of the self. And so it does require a huge mindset shift when you're coming from religion and shifting into spirituality. And I know that that's something that's very common. Like a lot of people make that shift and leap.
Oh, absolutely. And I didn't even, it's not much better on the other side of that. I was raised by agnostics. So it's very scientifically
Interesting.
minded. If it's not real
Yes.
at all if you can't put it in a test tube and shake it around.
Oh,
And
wow, wow.
yet,
Yeah.
right, and yet from the time I was 12 years old, I was seeing visions, hearing voices, astral projecting.
Yeah.
So I knew there was something else going on,
Yeah.
but I was afraid for a
Mm,
long time that it was because I was crazy. I had some mental deficiency, like there was something wrong with me. So
yeah.
there's on the flip side, coming out of religion, it's scary to let go of those fears, but it's also coming from a skeptic or an agnostic standpoint. It's also scary to embrace the uncertainty that, there are things going on. There's an unseen world. There is stuff science can't just point to and explain for you.
Absolutely. And that's a great perspective. I'm glad you brought up that agnostic side of things, because when I was going through my journey and leaving religion, I did put like temporarily shift into agnosticism. I wasn't sure if I was
Mm-hmm.
an atheist. I just knew that some of the religious beliefs that were being told as truths and that were concepts I needed to live my life by didn't necessarily feel right. So I kind of went through like this journey, ending up with on spirituality, and so far has felt like it's given me the most when it comes to self actualization. But it's great to hear that perspective in regards to like some of the issues that can happen when you're brought up agnostic and you do have those spiritual gifts and tendencies. So very interesting perspective.
So when you're working with people, what types of practices, like if it was a brand new person coming, what kinds of practices do you think are the best for beginning to do some of that inner work, beginning to take a look like if we're not even sure what it is, the trigger point is, how can people begin to start on that journey? What are some practices that you would recommend for people?
If someone is relatively new to the journey, perhaps they've had an awakening and they're curious about where they need to focus their efforts, I have recommended to people to consider someone who can look into your Akashic records. That's where I began, and it did give me a lot of information in regards to what was currently affecting me and the karma behind it. Because we do carry karma from prior lives, we carry karma from some of the things that have happened in this current lifetime, and that karma affects us. And so what's really great about some of these modalities, not just looking to the Akashic records, but other forms of like deep hypnosis or past life regression, is they give you exactly what you need. They don't give you more than that. They don't give you something you cannot handle. They give you the information that you need at that specific time in your journey. So there are a lot of different things that people can do. I just happen to recommend Akashic Records reading because it's relatively easy, it's simple. You get like enough information to get you started. But there are other things that people can do. You know, someone who's a really good divinator that can do tarot or use other forms of divination can also help provide a little bit of information in regards to the karma that's there or what you might need to focus your efforts on. I've seen some people do past life regression and work through with someone who can look into your past lives and say and find out what it is that's affecting you currently. So there are a lot of different ways you can go. Again, personally for me, I do just think Akashic Records reading, it's easy, it's simple. As long as the person is gifted and knows what they're doing, you're going to get the information you need to at least get you started, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Vet your sources, take a look at somebody's background and check out like reviews on people before
Oh,
you go
yes.
ahead and
Mm-hmm.
just. And I feel like too, it's good to like, you'll know if it resonates.
Oh, yeah.
Like if somebody's telling you something and you're like, that's, you'll know if what's being said hits and is like, oh yeah, that does sound right. Like
Mm-hmm.
if it resonates, so you'll be able to tell for sure. What can you say to that is supportive for people who are maybe in that dark night of the soul or doing some of that inner work and
Mm-hmm.
realizing that there's a lot coming up and are just sort
Oh,
of
yeah.
hitting that point where it's like, I'm not sure I want to look at all of that.
Yeah.
I think people hit an energetic wall where the ego personality, the waking ego human self feels destabilized
Yes.
or afraid of looking any further beyond that wall. It feels unsafe.
Yes.
How can we support people through those moments where the ego wants to turn back so badly?
You know, I have gone through that. I still go through that on occasion. You know, the interesting thing about the ego is that it wants to protect us. And the
Mm-hmm.
ego can be a benefit, but it can also be a hindrance because sometimes when that ego takes over, now you're in a place where you can't do that deeper work because the ego is in charge. The ego feels scared. The ego wants to stay in that protective, safe bubble. Um, One of the things I would recommend is if you're in a dark night of the soul or you're in that state where you're scared, like I don't want to look at this deep, dark, scary stuff. Get someone to help you because I feel like we try to do it on our own. We try to do it ourselves. We don't want to spend the money or we don't want to, go and do the research to find a spiritual coach or a guide. But I'm going to be honest, like I've tried doing it by myself and for me it was too difficult. I couldn't. I needed to go and get the support. And I feel like if more people had that mindset to go get the help, go get the support, it would be a lot. I can't say easy because it's not an easy journey, but it would help a lot. And even if it's just like, I know some people have the ability to connect to their guides and hear their
Mm-hmm.
guides. You can even do something like that. Talk to your guides, connect to your guides, ask for guidance and support. Hey, how can I get beyond this? What do you recommend? Which direction should I go? And the universe will guide you and point you in the direction you need to go as long as you listen. Outside of that, I do think it's really pivotal to either find a community or find a spiritual guide or a coach. Or I don't like the word guru, so I'll
No.
like spiritual coach, spiritual guide, someone who perhaps can channel for you, a channeler, a really good channeler who can connect to your guides for you, perhaps. But I do really recommend getting some type of support because if you try to do it yourself and you're in that state, you're not gonna, it's gonna be hard. I can't say you're not gonna be able to do it, but it's gonna be so hard. So again, it's another reason why we created the community, is because we know how hard that is and how scary it is. But at least if you have a group of people who are on a similar journey, you've got some support there, and you've got like a family and a soul family to help you a little bit.
Absolutely. Where can take let's take the opportunity. Where can people find your community if they're looking to reach out to like-minded people who are going through similar things?
So we are on Patreon, but what I typically like to do is direct people to our website, which is www.goddessvibrationstudio.com, because on the homepage there's a direct link that takes you to the Patreon. But there's also some other really cool stuff on our website. Like, we have a catalog of all of our prior episodes. We are currently in season 2, but season 1 is just chock full of lots of great, incredible information, especially if you're new to the spiritual journey, and like just chock full of fascinating stuff. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at some of those episodes if you're kind of curious, and if you're just getting involved in the journey and you want to hear some perspective from people who have navigated it a little bit. You know, we talk about everything from talking to angels and gods to like being able to go into different past lives, to I had like 2 episodes dedicated to my experience talking to a dead being who happens to be a celebrity. So there's just lots of incredible stuff in some of those prior episodes that I would recommend.
Absolutely. And we'll put that link in the description so it's easy for people to follow and go check out. I really appreciate you and your co-host. I appreciate all of the people who are out there putting this information out into the world, sharing spiritual experiences and helping hold each other's hands through developing a new way of thinking about life and about spiritual connection and about fulfillment in the world, because I think it's so important right now.
Mm.
We're kind of getting, like you said, fear
Yep.
and lack mentality and all of that on the one side. And I think the more we can spread and proliferate that there is another way to live and to look at life that is not like that, that doesn't feel that way, the better off the entire collective will be to find some balance in
Yeah.
that. So I think it's such important work that you're doing, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me, Kat. This has been a really fun conversation, and I hope it was helpful. And I would really love to see some of these people, your audience, check out our community. We are there to support. It's going to be a lot of fun. We have a lot of really great stuff in store, including live channeling sessions and live readings. So it's going to be a good time. We're just at that stage right now where we're trying to get the word out. So appreciate
Absolutely.
Yes, appreciate you taking the time to have me here on your podcast, and I hope that we can continue to stay in touch.
Absolutely. I will put that link in the description. Go check out Tiarra at the Goddess Vibration podcast and the website and community. It sounds like an excellent time. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kat.